Real estate agents are exiting the industry in droves. Is this good for you as a buyer or as an investor? And what did the NWMLS do that's completely backwards?
Anton Stentner podcast number 64. And today we're talking about real estate agents. They're exiting the industry. And the question is it good for home buyers or investors or neither? Either.
It's good for anyone. Let's start with the data on this one. Let's get into what's been happening so people are all on the same page. According to the Redfin Data Center, across all metros in 2021, basically this week is when home sales peaked at 106,537 units. That's from 5/3 to 5/30. And then the numbers I just looked at, because of course we're at 5/29 as the recording of this 2024. The numbers for 2024 from 4/29 to 5/26 were 76,000, or about 30% off of peak sales. So anytime you take away 30% of anyone's industry. And there are parts of the United States where transactions are down 50%. But if you take away 30% of the total transaction volume, obviously the industry has to contract a whole bunch. And if you think real estate is bad, just go look at lending. Okay, so lending went through that giant refi boom when everything was 3%. And all these lending companies massively staffed up. Lending has seen over an 80% reduction in the number of lenders. So are real estate agents exiting? Yes. At what level are they exiting and why? Well, there's less transactions. So less transactions means less deals, which means less commission in their pockets. So it's getting harder to buy and sell real estate at these high rates. And what we notice too, I get the text message from you, bro, look at the 10-year again. No, I'm serious. Tell me.
Yeah, well, just literally last week and the week before that, we were seeing a trend downwards because the numbers just justified it, or the market thought, hey, we're going into a season where we could potentially see rate drops. So then the market is preemptive about it. But what have we seen in the last 7 to 14 days is going right back up, right? Not quite to the high, but it's going up. Anything in this area, if it's ticking up, is just bad, right? Like going down is just like, okay, we're not going up anymore. So when you go up, and that is it's just making it harder to do anything for anyone.
Bingo. So what I want our listeners to know and to hear is inside of the data, as rates basically crest 7% and start to go above 7, you actually see transaction volume decline, which makes sense. Homes become less affordable, we sell them. And as they get close to 7 and under 7, you see transaction volume pick up. So as rates start to pick up again this week, you're like, rates are picking up. I was like, easy, bro. We have PCE coming out. We have other data coming out. We have some Fed speeches. Right before all this, the rates naturally float up again. If you're plugged in with a really good lender, your lender warns you of these things. They send you these emails at the beginning of the week that say this is one of those rate sensitive weeks. You should be locking now and not waiting until later. But let's go through where we're at with the total number of real estate agents and with NAR membership. Okay, so what is NAR first? NAR, National Association of Realtors. What is the difference between a realtor and a real estate broker?
Pay more money to be in NAR.
You pay more money. Yeah, always. Yeah. You pay more money. And so all real estate agents are licensed. And then there are brokers who have received additional training who may also then be able to have their own firm or have people work for them. In Washington State, they forced us to a higher standard. They made everyone brokers in Washington State, and they created another designation called the Managing Brokers License for you to be able to run people. I have a Managing Brokers License. But not all real estate agents are a part of the trade organization, the National Association of Realtors. In order to do that, they pay their dues, and they subscribe to a higher level of continuing education and a higher level of ethics. And then they may or may not get involved in the political activities where NAR is fighting on behalf of the industry, both at the local level, the state level, and then the national level. But part of those dues go to pay for that. So one thing that people don't always know, NAR is one of the largest trade associations in the US. They're huge. NAR's peak membership in October of 2022 was 1.6 million, and it's currently dropped to 1.5 million. So we've lost about 100,000 agents there. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has a measure that shows that if you include part-timers in the real estate sector, as of April 2024, we're at 1 million licensed real estate professionals in the US. But here's what's crazy. At a transaction run rate of about 4.2 million units. So our transaction run rate right now is the same as it was during the Great Recession. So at 2011, we were also at about 4.2 million. In 2021, when debt was really cheap, we almost hit 6.2. We peaked out at 6.12 million. So if you look at this and you just do some quick math, right? And you go, why are agents hurting so bad? Well, you go, okay, there's only 4.2 million transactions
Per year?
per year. That's the run rate right now. And there's 1.8 million real estate agents. 4.2 divided by 1.8 gets you 2.33 deals per agent. So let's assume the average agent sold the average house, and the median sales price, according to the St. Louis Fed, we talked about this before. The new one for Q1 just came out, $420,800. Let's say they made an average commission of 2.5%, which in this case would be $10,520. Times their 2.33 deals means they're only bringing in $24,511. But the thing you have to remember is when we're talking about commissions, it's just like a contractor. That's the gross amount for the job. So if the contractor said, hey, it's $100,000 to remodel your house, they're not pocketing $100,000. So generally speaking, they're going to have a split with the brokerage. They're going to lose 30%. Okay, that drops them to $17,158. Then about 30% of that's going to go to expenses if they're an individual broker or agent, leaving them about $12,000, $12,011 for the average agent, aka below the poverty line or get a second job. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics did another study and they said, well, how many of these real estate brokers are full-time? They assume there's about 440,000 full-time real estate agents in 2023, which was 72,000 less than the year before. So the industry right now is contracting. Its transaction count is contracting. And then some experts say, this one blew my mind, they believe now due to the NAR settlement that if commissions go down and with transaction volume being down, that the industry could contract up to 80%.
That's crazy.
It's an astounding number. My thoughts is we'll probably lose about half of the people. And so let's say the industry is about roughly 900,000, which would put you at about 200 and let's assume out of that 900,000 that 450,000 of them are full-time professionals. What I think you really see happening here is because the business has got harder, and now with this NAR settlement, and the NAR settlement is kind of simple. Let's break it down. The NAR settlement is this. Agents were supposedly colluding as a trade group to keep commissions high and inflated. So the settlement is by August of this year, they won't include buyer commissions on the MLS. And the buyer will have to negotiate their own compensation. If that does go through and commissions do go down, then of course the industry will contract more. But another way to think about this is this was all about saving the consumer money. And so another thing I read, Benji, was they were like, well, this means that the average price of a home is going to go down because it costs less to transact, which logically kind of makes sense. But here's the fundamental flaw there. Go on to, have you ever bought anything off of Facebook Marketplace?
Yes.
And it's a supply and demand game. So what was the last thing you bought?
Weights.
And then
for my garage gym that I still used.
I love it. And then Was the demand for that product really high or really low?
It was during the lockdowns, so it was very, very high. And yes, I paid the most for weights I ever did.
So you were like paying like the $2 a pound, the $1.70
For the light ones.
For the light, exactly. Back, when just pre-COVID, weights were about $1 a pound.
You could probably
75 cents.
You could probably get those for like the whole set for $10 at the Goodwill store. You couldn't then.
So that was a perfect example of supply and demand. Housing is about 2.8 million units behind. So we have more demand than supply. So therefore, the seller doesn't have to reduce their price. The seller will just mark it up to whatever they can get, which they did for weights during COVID, and somebody will buy it, which is happening right now because in the face of the high sevens across the U.S., home prices have risen. And even here in the Seattle Metro, they've outperformed what we thought they were going to do. So this notion that this is going to save the consumer money is 1,000% incorrect. The seller may be able to pocket a little bit more. Well, what is this going to do to agents as a whole? And then what are the rumblings I'm already hearing? Two things. I got a call from one particular broker who's been in the business 40 years. And she said, hey, I just want to get your thoughts on the settlement. And I think I'm done. I'm getting tired of this. When I started, a purchase and sale was like 4 to 5 pages. And now it's like 30. And everyone wants to sue everyone. And the business is getting harder. This is probably my last year. I think NAR just drove the nail in the coffin and those attorneys. I said, whoa, slow down. What can I do to help? Things like that. But that's the sentiment. The sentiment is that the industry is getting harder, which it is. And the professionalism is going up. And so what we're doing, and this part I love. So I don't fully agree with the NAR settlement and things like that, but I'm in love with this part. This increases the professionalism of real estate brokers. It demands that they demonstrate how a real estate agent is paid and their value. That's good for everyone. It's good for consumers. It's good for buyers, good for sellers. The settlement taking the commission out, though, I think can maybe possibly impact some buyers really negatively.
Because they're going to have to do it themselves or come out of pocket to pay their own agent. If you do it by yourself, you basically get taken advantage of to a certain degree because there's no obligation of the other agent to serve you. Yep. And if you want to do what you're supposed to do with probably the best course of action, which is get representation, get an agent, then you have to pay them money. I don't even know how it's going to work. Like potentially there's going to be like upfront fee type of situations.
It looks like how this is settling is they're going to be able to bake them into some of the loans and then, yes, pay it as like a closing cost, not necessarily like an upfront fee. I could see good agents, though, charging upfront fees like a retainer or a consulting fee, just like an attorney would do. Hey, if you're going to spend my time, here's what we have to do. My fear here is this affects that first-time home buyer disproportionately and lower income disproportionately. Because if I have a high income, I can afford good representation, which means I'm going to get a better deal. So if I just look at my personal stats versus the MLS, when I'm on the buy side, generally speaking, I net between 2.4 to sometimes as high as like 4.4 with an average of right around 3.6% more to my buyer than the average person. In other words, I get that off the list price. Well, why is that? Well, that's just a function of time on task and skill and doing thousands of real estate transactions. Well, if a first-time home buyer doesn't have the money, can they afford that level of representation?
No.
So what's going to happen, which is what happens right now, is I get hired by sharks. And the sharks say, go do shark shit and go get me that.
And I'll pay for it.
And I'll pay for it. No joke. Another call this week was, hey, we have a development project. It's not selling. And we want to sit down and have a consultation with you about our options, about keeping it, about building it out, about working our way through it, about raising the capital, about doing the deal. We're willing to leave money in, but we don't want to leave it all in. We want to take some out. Let's talk about these options. So someone can come to that highly skilled agent with a really in-depth problem and just pay them to solve it. But what about our poor first-time home buyer? I mean, so that's where I don't like this. And another interesting study that came out by the Consumer Federation of America, they surveyed 2,000 real estate agents, and they found out of those 2,000 agents, 49%, so roughly half, sold fewer than 2 homes in 2023. So what's happening is the industry is starting to chop itself in half, and I think it's going to shrink massively. And I believe that skill level and that professionalism is going to shoot up. And there's an opportunity for the skilled broker to be widely compensated. This is also going to create an opportunity for certain investors to move into the brokerage space and become licensed brokers themselves, whereas they may have avoided it before this because they're like, oh, it's too much liability. But because this level of liability is coming down, expect them to also start attacking alternative things, such as wholesaling, such as other vehicles that have happened off the market. One other fact I wanted to go through. Agents, they look at times like this and they say, you know what? When debt was really cheap and it was 3%, pretty much anyone could purchase a home. It was very easy to purchase a home. So that created that heyday. And the real estate industry, what it does is it follows the market. As these booms happen, a bunch of agents get in. And as these markets change, the agents start getting out, and then they usually miss the bottom. What's crazy is in the end of the Great Recession, it was actually easier to sell real estate than it was right now. And this is what people miss. So agents are going to totally be getting out of the business for over the next 24 to 36 months, and then they're going to miss this unique dip opportunity that only happens during recessions. So NAR membership peaked in 2006 at 1.4 million. Then from 2006 to 2012, we went from 1.4 million to just under a million. It was 999,824 in 2012. But we still did the 4.2 million deals that we're doing today, which means in 2012, there was 4.2 deals per agent available because there was about 1 million agents. Versus today, there's only about 2.3.
Now, to be fair, the average home price would play into this too.
Yes, absolutely.
So doing 4 was necessary because you're getting less commission versus now the house is so expensive, you only need to do 2, potentially.
Well, 2 still makes you at poverty.
Or 4 back then, probably still.
4 back then was still poverty.
Yeah.
And you had to get a second job. You had to have a side hustle. And so this is what I think this NAR settlement is doing. This is the point I'm trying to drive home. This is going to pinch out the part-timers. This is going to increase the professionalism. And so, what does this then mean for buyers, sellers, investors? 1, I don't think the sellers are going to net more money from the NAR settlement. Okay? Unless commissions dramatically change and decouple, but that's going to take time if it even happens. 2, I think it's going to get harder for buyers to purchase because of this settlement, because it starts to exclude FHA, VA, first-time home buyers, low income, things like that. Why? They can't afford the representation if they have to pay for it out of their pocket. So 3, who's the clear winner?
Investors.
I think in this whole thing, the clear winner is investors. It's 2 investors specifically. It's the ma and pa investor who owns 1 property, 2 properties. They're a partial winner, but the clear massive winner is Wall Street. And the reason they're the huge winner in this one specifically is they don't have to pay for the representation. They can afford the representation. They probably have attorneys on staff. Plus, they're going to pay cash, so they don't have to worry about financing in that, which means this allows them to attack our industry even more. Also, I think a middle of the road winner is the move-up seller. Here's why. The move-up seller is it very high demand product that they're selling. So they're going to be able to possibly squish down those commissions because there's such high demand. So then they get maximum net for their house, which allows them to purchase their, the next level up or their luxury home. So I could see the prediction. This is the prediction part. The luxury market growing even more over the next 5 years because of this. Because this rewards the middle and hurts the bottom. And then they're moving up into that luxury. Also, the other thing that is rewarding that luxury is the asset melt up. Like we talked about on the previous episode, the inflation of real estate prices, the inflation of their stocks, their bonds, of gold, of commodities, that's helping that luxury market. I think we're getting ready to go through a luxury boom, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, and if investors win because they can afford to pay for good agents like yourself that can negotiate on their behalf versus the other people that can't afford it, then those properties that they're buying because they're investors aren't for owner occupied. It's not so that they can live in it. So what happens? They're going to either fix and flip it, or probably going to be more and more likely rent it out to those people who couldn't get the house because they couldn't afford the fee. It's like this never-ending battle that the lower class loses.
This moves the goalpost for the American dream of home ownership further down the field. It makes it harder. That's the problem. And politicians, they don't want to attack the real problem. You're 2.8 million units behind. You need to build more houses. You need to do everything humanly possible to build more houses today to create inventory. Instead, they'd rather pontificate and blame hedge funds, blame corporate America, blame, loan programs, whatever it may be. When the reality is, we just don't have enough homes. And now it's harder to buy.
At one point, though, that means there would be less demand if those buyers aren't buying houses. So then wouldn't the leverage start falling on the buyers that could buy potentially?
Until you reach equilibrium. And if you're 2.8 million units behind, that's a lot of pressure against housing. So if you're 2.8 million units behind and you're selling 4.8 million units a year,
but demand is just lower, though. I'm saying you might not see the same amount of appreciation because the buyers that can afford an agent, there's just less of them. So there's not as much demand. So yeah, there is an equilibrium here. Ultimately, it still hurts the buyers that can't afford an agent. Yeah. I'm just saying there's another side to it too.
There's another side, but the supply side problem is so big that even if we clip out a portion of the buyers, there's still so many of them, it doesn't matter. That's why you're seeing massive appreciation today. You wouldn't be seeing the appreciation if the demand wasn't there. You wouldn't be seeing appreciation at 7% interest rates if demand wasn't vastly exceeding supply. So I don't see that equilibrium happening until supply comes up.
Yeah.
Now we got to look at something that's just the opposite of this. Our MLS, the NWMLS here, they took a different position on the NAR settlement. I actually can't believe this happened. And this is very pro
free market
broker.
Oh.
This is, I would say it's pro free market. And it's pro consumer. So remember, Washington, we are a very liberal state. So this is very consumer protection that they're doing, and I was surprised they do this. So they talk about basically in their settlement that, hey, this started in 2019. Home sellers filed 2 class action lawsuits against National Association of Realtors and several large brokerages. On October 31st, 2023, a jury in Missouri rendered a $1.8 billion verdict in favor of the plaintiffs. And since then, there's been 20 more copycat lawsuits. NAR basically settled those. They agreed to pay $418 million. And then they agree to have brokers make several practice changes and basically opt into the settlement. And that opting into the settlement is that they remove buyer compensation from the MLS. Okay. The NWMLS took the opposite of this, and this is what they said in their press release. In 2019, the NWMLS eliminated the requirement that the seller offers compensation to the buyer's broker. And at the same time, the NWMLS made public the amount of compensation offered to the buyer's broker to inform buyers of any such offer. So when they say made public, they started publishing those not only on their site and not only on the MLS, but to third-party sites like Zillow and Redfin. So they made it public what was being offered. And then in 2022, the NWMLS again led the industry by providing even more transparency and flexibility for buyers, sellers, and brokers. The most notable change was the decoupling of broker compensation, meaning that compensation the seller chooses to offer the buyer's broker is not set, is set and paid by the seller, not the listing broker. And any compensation offered by the seller to the buyer broker is prominently stated on the first page of the purchase and sale agreement, which gives the opportunity for that compensation to be negotiated by the buyer and the buyer's broker. What's interesting is the NWMLS was actually referenced in the lawsuit. So in the lawsuit and in the documents, they said the NWMLS was ahead. So this is something brand new that they've now declared, saying we're not going to stop because we're publishing a decoupled version. And inside the listing paperwork, it literally says, here's how much the seller's paying the listing agent. What happens if the buyer's represented, unrepresented, represents? It's got all these different categories and it breaks it down.
So the Northwest MLS justification for not following through the NAR's judgment or the settlement is because they're giving mass disclosure.
Because they're giving mass disclosure and they already started breaking it apart.
So could this potentially lead to other MLS organizations doing the same thing and then we're back to square one?
I don't know. Okay, but that
seems like that's what's going to happen.
That's a phenomenal question, but let me throw a wild card out there so the listeners are on the same page. The wild card is the MLSs that were sued were owned by NAR. The NWMLS is member owned. So you do not have to be a member of NAR, nor does NAR control it. So the NWMLS is not a part of that lawsuit.
What about agents that are under NAR? Can they still use?
Yes, they can.
Northwest MLS?
Agents that are not a member of NAR can use the NWMLS. That is correct.
Not a member. But what if you are a member of
Both.
NAR? And then this happens where Northwest MLS
well,
doesn't.
it's weird because you can still opt into the settlement.
Yeah.
So there's chips here that are trying to fall, but the reality is this: the MLS felt like that their method of doing it was so clear already and was already decoupling, but then they go into, and I want to find exactly what they said so I say this correctly. NAR's proposed settlement agreement largely duplicates the rules and practices in place with the NWMLS for years, with one notable exception. The settlement agreement eliminates compensation transparency for buyers and restrains sellers' choice by prohibiting sellers from making offers of compensation through the MLS. Instead, the settlement agreement allows for offers of compensation, quote unquote, off MLS, where the information is hard to find and not available to all buyers. That change is a step in the wrong direction and detrimental. And what they believe, and I'm just going to skip down a little bit, is that the removal of compensation from the MLS pushes consumers and brokers to make secret off-market deals, inviting deceptive practices, discrimination, and unfair housing, depriving buyers of information about the transaction risks, harming buyers, especially those who are already disadvantaged, including first-time homebuyers and members of promoted classes. So the NWMLS, because we're such a liberal state and so pro-consumer, they chose to keep it to protect the consumer. So they're like on opposite sides of the argument right now. But what's interesting is, and remember, I'm more on the moderate conservative capitalist side, so I'm all for deregulation. I think this really protects the consumer more than the other method. Because like we were talking about earlier, if you can't afford good representation, you can't hire the best professional. And this is saying we have to keep it there so we prevent unfair housing practices and that we don't squeeze out certain segments of buyers.
The NAR settlement, correct me if I'm wrong, does it state that the seller can't offer any kind of compensation?
The seller can, but it has to be offered off the MLS.
Off the MLS, so it won't happen on the listing.
Correct.
Right? It can't happen even on the paperwork.
Yes, it could happen like on the purchase and sale.
Yeah.
But here, let's think about this in reality.
So what I think I know where you're going. A buyer agent,
yes,
calls seller agent.
Yes.
Hey, is there a commission here?
Yeah.
Seller agent goes, yeah, there is. I was like, okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure. Submits the listing. And then on the flip side, buyer agent goes, ring, ring, ring.
Yes.
Seller agent goes, hello. Buyer agent here. Is there a commission on the listing? Seller goes, no. It's like, okay, nothing gets submitted.
No offer. Yeah.
And then what do you call that rule where the agent has to do what's best for their client?
Fiduciary.
And so they would be breaking that.
In Washington State, yes. Not all states require the fiduciary responsibility that we require here in Washington, and not all real estate agents subscribe to be a NAR member to the higher level of code of ethics.
Could you see a weird business
Yes.
where a person, all they do is call up all the selling agents and figure out if there's a listing commission and literally just makes a website that tells you, right?
Yeah.
And then the call doesn't have to happen and it's just traffic.
But this is where it's so just bass backwards. Like it's just, wait a second. You want to take away technology and you want everyone to make phone calls and you want the people who are good at negotiating to negotiate phenomenal deals and just leave everyone behind. Good job on that settlement. I guess the attorneys got paid and everyone else got screwed. Because what happens then is, once again, someone like me calls and is like, Benji, bro, what are we offering? And my bro goes, oh, for you? What do you need? I said, we'd like to get paid $5. Cool. Let's put that in front of the seller. But then maybe I call and we're not friends and we haven't a bunch of deals together. And you're like, don't know this guy. Yeah, the seller might offer something. Submit it in writing. Also flip it around in a competitive offer situation where there's 4 offers. The seller is, of course, going to choose the one that nets them the most and just cut people out. So if you can't pay for the representation, you're dead in the water.
So then there's more of an incentive to be a seller agent versus a buyer agent.
There always has been. I mean, let's be really blunt. It's always been best to be a listing agent or a listing broker and represent the seller. Why? Because then you own the store. It's your eBay store. It's your Amazon store, and everyone comes to you. And I can have 100 listings. I could probably only sell 10, 15 buyers at one time. But I could sell 100 listings with one assistant. Okay? The same amount of work, not the same amount of work, a different type of work because of the physical viewing of the properties would require, I probably only did 10 transactions in that same time. So we've always been super listing heavy. It helps us control inventory. And because we're hardcore investors, we're making our own inventory as we go all of the time. All this is doing is it's pushing people more to the listing side. This is hurting buyer brokerage overall.
And then I guess my last question for you to answer is, where does that put the first-time home buyer or the maybe the buyer that doesn't have the resources? And then what's the next logical step on what happens to those people?
Ooh, really good question. It puts first-time home buyers at a significant disadvantage, except for possibly in Washington State, and maybe some others will follow.
So what happens? What will they logically do afterwards?
And
Because they still want a house.
That first-time home buyer is going to be forced into renting. which is going to drive up rents more. And then how does that first-time home buyer solve the problem? They're going to have to figure out how to do a lease option, how to purchase an off-market deal, or how to get Dear Aunt Tilly to come in and help them fund it.
But I'm just putting myself in the shoes of that buyer. Yeah. Won't they be the ones to look for listings that pay their agent, potentially?
Oh, brilliant. No, I didn't even think of that. Yes.
So then it'll just become a norm. And so what I'm saying is, guess what ends up happening? All sellers have to pay a buyer agent
still
if they want to get the traffic, because now if you're a seller that doesn't have to pay a buyer agent, but you want those people, even if they can't afford it, it's like, hey, I'll pay for it, right? Then it gets more valuable to be the listing that pays a buyer's agent.
Yeah.
So naturally it goes that direction.
Yeah. Well, a good example of this, and so, always look for the patterns in history, right? Is when the market was on stupid fire, builders cut their buyer agent commissions and their listing commissions, for that matter, down to nothing, and some were offering zero. That stayed around for like a brief blip in time.
What year was that?
That would have been late 2020 and through probably mid 21-ish. And that was hitting quite a few spots in the country. And even here in this, we had lots of builders offering like 1%. And then interest rates changed. And then, boom, all the commissions shot right back up. Why? They want to incentivize an activity that sells their product. Their product wasn't selling. They had to go back and incentivize the activity. Are commissions going away? Most likely not. Are commissions going to change? Probably. Does that mean some agents are going to make more? Absolutely.
I'm trying to poke holes in this.
Yeah.
Can buyers in their contract with can agents in their contract with buyers say, hey, I need to make money, and if you can't pay my fee, we need to buy houses off of listings that will pay my fee?
Yes.
So you see what I'm saying? Like, it puts them in the same place.
So this
is like almost like, to me, a big waste of time.
It is, and I think the attorneys were the ones that won the most. But what I want our listeners to hear, real specifically, this hurts first-time home buyers. It forces them into rentals and drives up rental rates, number one. Number two, this helps investors, and a large chunk of our audience is investors. This is a buy signal, okay? I don't know how many more buy signals I need to show you, but this is another buy signal where it's like, oh, I should start purchasing. Why? Because rental rates will go up because of artificial pressure on them. I don't know how it plays out though long term. And going back to what you were just talking about, in buyer agreements, that says, what if no compensation is offered? What if compensation is offered? What if compensation is offered only to a certain amount? So let's give an example. You were charging them 3.5%. Compensation was offered to 2.5%. There's a 1% delta. In buyer's agreements in Washington State right now, once again, we're way ahead of everyone. It says what happens to that extra 1%. And then most of the time it says the buyer pays it. So right now, even if the commission comes up short, most of the time the buyer is already paying it. So the market's equalizing. It's finding its way through. This will also promote, like you were saying, more alternative models. I don't know what all of them are, but alternative models are coming. Disruption creates opportunity. Real estate is being disrupted. It's changing any way we look at it. I believe there will be less agents in the future. There will be more technology, more professionalism, and the demand for a higher level of skill will be backed with higher compensation. Definitely on a per agent basis, higher compensation, but I believe there are agents who will receive much higher compensation in this new market than they did previously.